In just 41 seconds, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors would unleash a verbal assault so devastating that it would leave late-night television's golden boy speechless, stumbling, and desperately reaching for his cue cards. What started as seemingly innocent banter about Johnny Depp's latest film project quickly devolved into a savage takedown that exposed Stephen Colbert's true character on live television, culminating in the most dramatic guest walkout in late-night history. The tension was palpable from the moment Johnny Depp stepped onto the Late Show stage last night. Dressed in his signature dark attire, rings gleaming under the studio lights, Depp carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived Hollywood's most brutal character assassination attempts. But something was different about his demeanor. There was an edge, a barely contained intensity that suggested he wasn't here to play the typical promotional game. Stephen Colbert, ever the showman, greeted Depp with his trademark theatrical enthusiasm, but even seasoned viewers could detect something off in his approach. The host's smile seemed forced, his gestures more calculated than usual. Industry insiders later revealed that Colbert had been briefing his writers all week about taking Depp down a peg, apparently still bitter about the actor's legal victories and public rehabilitation. "Johnny Depp, everybody," Colbert announced with exaggerated fanfare as the audience erupted in genuine applause. The contrast was striking. While the crowd showed authentic appreciation for Depp, their host's energy felt manufactured, almost mocking. Depp settled into the guest chair with characteristic nonchalance, offering a subtle nod to the audience before turning his attention to Colbert. "Stephen," he said simply, his voice carrying that distinctive, gravelly quality that has captivated audiences for decades. "Johnny, great to have you here," Colbert began, his tone already carrying an undercurrent of condescension that would prove prophetic. "I have to say, you look like you've been through quite the journey lately." The comment landed like a lead balloon. Depp's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of recognition that this wasn't going to be a typical promotional appearance. The audience, initially buzzing with excitement, began to sense the underlying tension. "We've all been through journeys, Stephen," Depp replied evenly, his fingers absently adjusting one of his silver rings. "Some of us just handle them with more grace than others." Colbert's laugh was sharp, almost harsh. "Grace, right. Speaking of grace, let's talk about your new film. It's quite the comeback story, isn't it? I mean, after everything that happened." The host let the sentence hang in the air like a loaded weapon. Depp's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "I prefer to think of it as a continuation rather than a comeback. I never really went anywhere, Stephen. Some people just tried very hard to make it seem like I had." "Oh, come on now," Colbert pressed, leaning forward with predatory interest. "You can't seriously sit there and pretend that your reputation wasn't seriously damaged by all those allegations. I mean, Disney dropped you from Pirates of the Caribbean. That's got to sting." The studio audience grew noticeably uncomfortable. This wasn't the playful ribbing they expected from late-night television. This felt personal, vindictive. Depp, however, remained composed, though those watching closely could see his knuckles whitening as his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "You know what stings, Stephen," Depp said, his voice taking on a dangerous quiet that made everyone lean in. "What stings is watching someone who built their career on fake outrage and manufactured controversy try to lecture me about reputation. At least when my name was dragged through the mud, it was by people who knew me personally. You're doing it for ratings." The comment hit its mark. Colbert's composure cracked for just a moment, his practiced smile faltering as he realized he might have bitten off more than he could chew. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Fake outrage? Really?" Colbert's voice rose slightly, his trademark smugness becoming more pronounced. "I think holding powerful men accountable for their actions is pretty legitimate, don't you? I mean, we can't all just sail away on our private islands and pretend nothing happened." The reference to Depp's legal troubles and personal retreat from public life was clearly intended as a knockout punch. But Depp had survived far worse than anything Stephen Colbert could dish out, and his response would prove that this Hollywood survivor wasn't going to be anyone's punching bag ever again. Depp's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been pushed too far for too long. "You want to talk about accountability, Stephen? Let's talk about accountability." Let's talk about how you've built your entire persona around mocking and belittling people while hiding behind the excuse of comedy. At least I've faced my accusers in court. When was the last time you faced any real consequences for the damage you do? The studio fell silent. Even the cameraman seemed to freeze as the full weight of Depp's words settled over the set. This wasn't scripted banter. This was a genuine confrontation between two men who clearly had very different ideas about truth, justice, and public accountability. Colbert's face flushed red, his legendary quick wit apparently deserting him when faced with someone who wasn't intimidated by his platform or his audience. The host fumbled for his cue cards, clearly looking for a prepared comeback that would help him regain control of the situation. But Johnny Depp was just getting started. And what happened next would transform this from an uncomfortable interview into television history. You know what's really rich, Stephen? Depp continued, his voice gaining momentum like a gathering storm. You sit behind this desk every night, making jokes about people's pain, their struggles, their darkest moments, and you call it entertainment. You've never had to fight for your reputation the way I have. You've never had lies spread about you by people you trusted. You've never had to watch your children read horrible things about their father in the press. The audience was dead silent now. The usual late-night atmosphere completely evaporated. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation. Colbert's production team could be seen frantically gesturing from the sidelines, clearly unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Colbert finally found his voice, but it came out shaky, defensive. Look, Johnny, I think you're being a little dramatic here. This is just normal interview conversation. We talk about current events. We talk about what's in the news. Bullshit. Depp cut him off sharply, causing several audience members to gasp. The profanity hung in the air like a slap. This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is character assassination disguised as comedy. And you know what the worst part is? You're not even good at it. Colbert's face went from red to purple. His carefully constructed television persona was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the studio could see it. I don't think you understand how this works, Johnny. You came on my show. You're promoting your movie. If you can't handle a few tough questions. Tough questions? Depp laughed. But there was no humor in it. Only contempt. These aren't tough questions, Stephen. These are cheap shots from a man who's never had to face real adversity. You want to know what a tough question is? How about this? When did you decide that destroying people's lives was more important than entertaining your audience? The host was visibly struggling now, his famous quick wit completely abandoning him when faced with someone who refused to play by his rules. He glanced desperately at his producers, but they were frozen, unsure how to handle a situation that had spiraled so far beyond their control. I think maybe we should take a commercial break, Colbert stammered, reaching for the safety of his standard procedures. Oh no, Depp said, standing up from his chair with predatory grace. We're not taking a break. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. You wanted to humiliate me on national television? Well, congratulations, Stephen. You've succeeded in humiliating someone tonight. Just not the person you intended. The camera operators didn't know where to focus. Some zoomed in on Depp's face, capturing every line of controlled fury. Others stayed on Colbert, documenting his complete meltdown in high definition. The audience sat transfixed, witnessing something they knew they'd never see again. You think you're some kind of moral authority? Depp continued, his voice rising for the first time. You think you have the right to judge people? To decide who deserves redemption and who doesn't? But what qualifies you for that role, Stephen? What battles have you fought? What injustices have you overcome? When have you ever stood up for anything that actually mattered? Colbert was sweating now, his makeup starting to run under the hot studio lights. I stand up for things all the time. My show is about social justice, about holding people accountable. Your show is about your ego. Depp shot back without missing a beat. It's about you feeling superior to everyone else. You don't care about justice. You care about being seen as the good guy, while you tear other people down. That's not heroism, Stephen. That's cowardice. The words hit like physical blows. Colbert actually recoiled, his chair rolling backward slightly. The man who had made a career out of verbal sparring was being systematically dismantled by someone who had learned to fight dirty in the court of public opinion. And another thing, Depp pressed on, sensing his opponent's weakness. You want to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean? You want to talk about Disney dropping me? Let me tell you something about corporations, Stephen. They're cowards, just like you. They make decisions based on fear, not facts. But here's the difference between me and you. When the truth finally came out, when the evidence was presented, when justice was actually served, I was vindicated. Can you say the same about all the people you've destroyed over the years? Colbert tried to respond, opening his mouth several times, but no words came out. His entire worldview was being challenged on live television, and he had no prepared response, no clever comeback, no way to regain control of the narrative. What's the matter, Stephen? Depp taunted, moving closer to the desk. Cat got your tongue? Or are you finally realizing that when you're not reading from a teleprompter, when you're not surrounded by yes-men and sycophants, you're actually pretty fucking pathetic? The second profanity caused an audible stir in the audience. This was uncharted territory for late-night television. The FCC would have a field day with this, but nobody seemed to care about broadcast standards anymore. They were watching something historic unfold. Colbert finally managed to speak, but his voice was weak, defeated. I think you should leave. Depp smiled for the first time since the interview began, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. Oh, I'll leave, Stephen. But not because you told me to. I'll leave because I've said everything I came here to say. But as Depp turned toward the exit, Colbert made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his dignity and regain control of his own show. What he said next would prove to be the biggest mistake of his career. Yeah, run away, Johnny, Colbert called out, his voice cracking with desperation and false bravado. Just like you always do when things get tough. Run back to your bottle. Run back to your drugs. Run back to whatever fantasy world you live in where you're still relevant. The words echoed through the studio like a gunshot. The audience collectively gasped, and even the most hardened production crew members looked shocked. Colbert had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He had gone after Depp's well-documented struggles with addiction, his personal demons that the actor had fought so publicly and painfully to overcome. Depp froze mid-step. For a moment, the entire studio held its breath, waiting to see how he would respond to such a vicious, deeply personal attack. When he slowly turned around, his face had transformed completely. Gone was the controlled anger, the measured contempt. What remained was pure, cold fury. What did you just say? Depp's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have conveyed. He walked back toward the desk with deliberate, predatory steps, each footfall echoing in the deathly quiet studio. Colbert immediately realized his mistake. The color drained from his face as he watched Depp approach, understanding that he had just awakened something far more dangerous than he was prepared to handle. I didn't mean— No, Depp interrupted, his voice gaining volume and intensity with each word. You said it. You fucking said it. You want to talk about addiction? You want to mock someone's struggle with their demons? Let's talk about that, Stephen. Depp reached the desk and leaned across it, bringing his face inches from Colbert's. The camera caught every detail. The host's trembling hands, the sweat beading on his forehead, the absolute terror in his eyes as he realized he had pushed too far. You know what addiction is, Stephen? It's pain so deep, so overwhelming, that you'll do anything to make it stop. It's waking up every day fighting a war inside your own head. It's watching people you love look at you with disappointment, fear, disgust. It's losing everything that matters to you and still not being able to stop. Depp's voice was building to a crescendo, each word hitting like a hammer blow. The audience was transfixed, witnessing raw vulnerability transformed into devastating power. But you know what addiction isn't, Stephen. It isn't a punchline. It isn't material for your fucking monologue. It isn't something you get to weaponize against someone just because they had the audacity to call you out for being a coward. Colbert tried to speak, to apologize, to somehow undo what he had done. But Depp wasn't finished. Not even close. You want to know about running away? Let me tell you about running away. Running away is hiding behind a desk and a television camera, taking shots at people who can't fight back. Running away is building your entire career on other people's pain and calling it comedy. Running away is what you're doing right now. Trying to destroy someone else to avoid looking at your own pathetic excuse for a life. The studio was absolutely silent except for Depp's voice, which seemed to fill every corner of the space. Even the crew had stopped pretending to work, completely absorbed by the verbal assassination they were witnessing. I fought my demons, Stephen. I went to court. I faced my accusers. I put my life under a microscope for the whole world to see. I lost millions of dollars, years of my life, relationships with people I loved. But I fought. I didn't hide. I didn't run. And when the truth came out, when the evidence was presented, I was vindicated. Depp straightened up slightly but kept his eyes locked on Colbert's terrified face. But you? You've never fought for anything in your life. You've never risked anything real. You've never put yourself on the line for anyone or anything that mattered. You're a fucking parasite, Stephen. You feed off other people's misery and call it entertainment. Colbert was visibly shaking now, completely broken. The man who had built an empire on verbal wit and quick comebacks had been reduced to a trembling mess by someone who had learned to fight back against far worse than anything late-night television could dish out. And you know what the saddest part is? Depp continued, his voice dropping back to that dangerous whisper. You could have been something better. You had talent once. You had the ability to actually entertain people, to bring joy into their lives. But you chose this instead. You chose to be a bully. You chose to be cruel. You chose to be everything that's wrong with this fucking industry. Depp stepped back from the desk, his eyes never leaving Colbert's face. So here's what's going to happen, Stephen. I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to sit there and think about what just happened. You're going to think about how you let your ego and your cowardice turn you into exactly the kind of person you claim to oppose. The actor adjusted his rings one final time, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both elegance and menace. And maybe, if you have any decency left in that shriveled excuse for a soul, you'll remember this moment the next time you think about using someone else's pain for a cheap laugh. Depp turned toward the exit once more, but this time there was no hesitation, no looking back. He had said everything he needed to say, delivered every blow that needed to be delivered. As he walked toward the studio doors, the audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Behind him, Stephen Colbert sat frozen at his desk, utterly destroyed. His carefully crafted persona lay in ruins, his reputation shattered by someone who had endured far worse and emerged stronger. The host, who had made a career out of humiliating others, had just been humiliated himself, on live television, in front of millions of viewers. As Depp reached the studio doors, he paused for just a moment and turned back to face the camera directly. To anyone out there who's struggling with addiction, who's fighting their own demons, who's been torn down by people like this, don't let them win. Fight back, stand up. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and when it does, make sure you're the one left standing. With that final statement, Johnny Depp walked out of the Late Show studio, leaving behind one of the most devastating verbal destructions in television history. Stephen Colbert never recovered from that night, his show's ratings plummeting as clips of his humiliation went viral worldwide. Meanwhile, Depp's stock soared higher than ever, his dignity intact and his reputation fully restored by his refusal to be anyone's victim ever again. The confrontation became legendary, a masterclass in how to handle bullies, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to accept it.